Hi, I'm Ryan Dalgliesh. Let's talk Bible. You're going to want to tune in this week for all 3 episodes because we're going to be talking this week about the Sabbath. And today we're going to talk about the Sabbath from the Old Testament. Now we know that the very first time that the Sabbath is mentioned in the scripture is Exodus 16, when the people were gathering manna. 6 days you're allowed to gather manna. On the 7th there will be no manna to gather. But where we begin to get a feel for why the Sabbath was created is in Exodus 20. In Exodus 20, where we receive the 10 Commandments, Moses, having gone up on the mountain, met with God. And one of the 10 Commandments is to observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you can work, and on the 7th you don't work, because in 6 days God created the earth, and on the 7th day God rested. And it's going to tell us that in Exodus 31 that the purpose of the Sabbath is to demonstrate that God is the one who makes people holy. So if you were an Israelite, if you were following Moses and you were serving God, having just come out of 430 years of slavery in Egypt, one of the things that's explained is that the Sabbath was a sign that God is the one who makes you holy. That's Exodus 31:13. So that's really important to remember. We're going to talk about that in all 3 videos this week. That the Sabbath is a sign that God is the one who makes you holy. But verses 14 and 15 say if you violate the Sabbath, the penalty is death. If you violate the Sabbath, if you do something, some sort of work, if you work in such a way that it breaks the Sabbath or doesn't demonstrate that God is the one who makes you holy, the result of that is death. And we're going to find out that that's pretty strict, okay? Now, one of the things that we need to know is that in the book of Leviticus, we see that it wasn't, in terms of the Sabbath, it wasn't just the 7th day of the week. There were Sabbaths associated with the Passover. There were Sabbaths associated with the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Booths, those kinds of things. So when we think of Sabbath, we normally just think of the 7th day of the week. We wrongly think of Sunday or church day, but we'll talk about that soon. And I want you to remember that in the Old Testament, there were Sabbaths that were other than the 7th day of the week. Now, just to show you the severity of the Sabbath, I've enlisted the help of a friend named Bob. Let's see if Bob is home. Bob, you in there? Hey, Bob, remember we were going to talk to the people about the Sabbath. Okay, are you ready to help me? Okay, thank you. So, Bob, we're gonna interact, and you're gonna show these people what the Sabbath was like and the punishment for the Sabbath. Right. So, in Numbers 15, there was a man. Bob gets to be the man. There was a man who was gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And the people came to Moses and they said to Moses, hey, what are we to do about this guy who's gathering sticks on the Sabbath? Think about this for a minute. The Sabbath is indicated to show that God is the one who makes you holy, and if you break the Sabbath, you're going to die. I know. Sorry, Bob. So, Bob's picking up sticks on the Sabbath, and what happens? The community of believers, having addressed Moses, and Moses having spoken to God, finds out that this guy deserves death. Bob deserves death. And so what they would do is they would take the guy outside of the city, and they would stone him to get to death with stones. I know, Bob, but this is what we agreed to. I will buy you Chick-fil-A. Yes, value-sized. Okay. So, here's what we have so far. The Sabbath is a picture of God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the 7th. But the Sabbath wasn't only about 1 day a week. It also was associated with certain feast days throughout the year. The Sabbath was something in the Old Testament that indicated that God was the one who made people holy. And the penalty for breaking the Sabbath was death. Remember those last 2 things as key. That the Sabbath is a picture of God making people holy, and that if you break the Sabbath, the penalty is death. So a couple of other things. In the prophet Isaiah, about 700 plus years after Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, we have Isaiah saying via God, or God speaking through the prophet Isaiah in chapter 1, that he doesn't like the people's Sabbaths anymore. He has him saying in chapter 58 that here's the real Sabbath. Here's the Sabbath that I really want you to participate in, that you would desist from your own way, that you would desist from your own pursuits, and that you would pursue the things of God. We'll talk more about that in the coming videos. But then one other thing that I want you to notice is that when God is speaking to his people, Israel, in the Old Testament, he tells them in Ezekiel 20 about 3 or 4 times. He says, not only have you violated my laws and my statutes, he goes, you've never upheld my Sabbaths. If you had done these things, you would have had life through these things. And so he tells them, you broke my laws, you broke my statutes, you didn't uphold my Sabbaths. You didn't uphold the Sabbath, which was indicated to show that God is the one who makes you holy. So Old Testament, when it addressed the Sabbath, not just 1 day a week, but those that were associated with the feast days, the Sabbath was something that was a picture of God working for 6 days and resting on the 7th. The Sabbath was something that was a picture of God making his people holy. and then if you violated the Sabbath, certain death, right? So that was, in a nutshell, thanks Bob for your help, that was in a nutshell a view of the Old Testament Sabbath. Let's see what Jesus has to say about the Sabbath in our next video. Thanks so much for watching. Didn't want to take up too much of your time today. Please be sure to like and subscribe and share this video, and I'll see you soon.